first of all, let me start by thanking you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah.
It's wonderful to chat with you for reasons which I'll briefly explain to you, and I think you kind of already know. And I also want to thank everyone who's watching right now and showing support. And how about I just started off with an easy question? Okay, I'll lob you a softball.
Sure.
Can you confirm that I am indeed the lead CEO of HTMX?
You know, you're definitely a CEO of HTMX.
Well, that's all we have time for, folks. Thank you for coming to the interview.
Definitely a CEO of
Okay, I'll
HTMX.
take it. But secretly, I'm really the lead CEO. Okay, so to get started, maybe just give like a little bit of a description of like who you are and what you've been doing and how people might know you right now, just in case there's somebody who doesn't know who I'm talking to right now.
Sure. Well, my name is Carson Gross, and I made HTMX and a couple other open source projects, intercooler before HTMX, but HTMX has really kind of blown up in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
And it's a HTMX, if anyone doesn't know, is a kind of a hypermedia oriented library that sort of a different take on how to use JavaScript to enhance the web. Kind of tries to focus on making improving HTML as a hypermedia is the way I usually say it.
Right.
And so it's something I've been kind of messing around with for a long time now. I started Intercooler, which was the predecessor to HTMX, probably. I think it's over 10 years ago now.
Right.
And it sort of took a long time to bake, but the time was right, and got lucky and got picked up by like the Primeagen and some other people, and now we're just riding the wave.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of fun. It's a little overwhelming at times, but I teach at Montana State. That's my main source of employment
Right.
is teaching at Montana State. So I teach computer science there.
Cool. Okay. Well, I mean, when I was preparing the questions, I sent them over to you. When I was preparing the questions, you know that there is a ton of meme and troll questions we could go into. But what I'm
Sure.
trying to do is kind of like um, uh, throw you a few questions that maybe you haven't really touched upon before, because I've seen you talk online and I've seen you been interviewed before, like for example the Primeagen. So I'm trying to give a different angle here. So the first
Sure.
question, the first real question: what
Yeah.
problem is HTMX meant to solve?
HTMX, I can give you the exact problem that it was meant to solve, which when I created the JavaScript function that would become intercooler JS, it was I was using jQuery. This was back probably in like the 2010, around 2010, and I had a table that I was trying to sort in a web app, and I
Mhm.
was trying to be a cool kid and do it in JavaScript and use quicksort and all that stuff, and it was just really really slow. And almost out of desperation, I thought to myself, well, I can't make this work. What if I just tried to do it on the server? And then I found out you could just take a chunk of HTML and slam it into the DOM.
Right.
And so I tried that, and lo and behold, it worked really, really well. And it was, not, it was very fast compared to the JavaScript of the time. Now, at that time, we didn't have the highly optimized JavaScript runtimes that we have today. So
Yeah.
I'm sure it would be a different situation today.
Yeah.
But that sort of started off, and it started off just as a little helper function. And then I think I saw Angular, and I saw how Angular was using attributes, and was like, oh, I could use that to not have to write jQuery stuff. I could just put a little attribute on here and look it up with jQuery. And that eventually that turned into intercooler. And so I just had that sort of sitting on the side, and I was kind of building out intercooler, and it was sort of just a different take on it. Was my take. I didn't really know, because Angular was still new at that time. It was still
Right.
pretty new. And there was like Knockout and a couple of other
Oh, I remember
things. I
that.
had seen one really heavy XJS. Did you ever hear of XJS? I
Yes,
think it's
I
still
did.
around.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So I had my employer before I started the job where I was working on intercooler used XJS, and that kind of gave me it left a sour taste in my mouth for
Yeah.
JavaScript frameworks. And so that was another part of it, was just me saying, I just don't want to deal with all that junk. I was kind of an old school web programmer, and I
Right.
just wanted to do it sort of the old school way. So that was the initial sort of motivation for intercooler. And then as I kind of put intercooler out there, I had a lot of people telling me, "Hey, this is cool. This is RESTful," and so that inspired me to go back and look at Roy Fielding at his thesis, which I'd when people were arguing about that early on, like in the late 2000s, I was pretty young and I didn't understand really what they were talking about. And now that I can go back and see what they were talking about, I think they were kind of talking past one another. But I realized, oh wow, okay, this does make sense. And there's this whole notion of the web that's kind of being lost as we transition into JavaScript heavy JSON based applications. And just by chance, almost, I have an opportunity to kind of talk about that, and maybe try and bring it back to some prominence in web development. So it really started off very practical, like this just wasn't JavaScript wasn't fast enough, and then kind of snowballed from there. But
Right.
I think today what you would say is it's trying to complete HTML as a hypertext, to make HTML everything it could be as a hypertext.
Right.
So
Okay. That's fair. So, you brought up something. There was a point there that I kind of want to try and key in on. So, at some point, you're saying that there was a loss to from the traditional way of doing, like, the back end driven websites, and something happened along the way, and things kind of lost their way in the front end world, and so you found yourself in this position where you're looking at HTMX, intercooler, HTMX, etc. From your perspective, I have my own perspective, I have my own opinion on what happened. From your perspective, what do you think happened that led to that point, to that change?
yeah, boy, that's a hard thing. Like what I saw was the 2010s, the early 2010s. That's when like the Googles and the Facebooks really had this dominant mind share in developers, and there was this new thing, like Hacker News was a thing. There was this centralization of tech news first in Slashdot, if you remember Slashdot,
I
and then
do,
Hacker News
yeah.
kind of took over.
Yeah.
Reddit always kind of was there, but is its own thing. And so I think, there's always been sort of the heroic archetype in technology where, you want to be the Steve Jobs who comes out with the revolutionary thing. And it was pretty clear that HTML wasn't producing applications that competed, particularly with mobile. I think mobile was a big source of pressure on web apps because people were able to just do much, they were able to achieve much richer interactions with mobile applications. I remember for a while people were like, oh, mobile's going to kill the web. So, I think those sort of dynamics came together. And Facebook, kind of, I've talked to some people who were around at Facebook in the time, and it sounds like was so often the case, the history here is much messier than it seems from the outside. But for whatever reason, they kind of picked the React horse to go with, and then for whatever reason, no matter how hard that horse bucked over the last 6 years, people just didn't get off of it. So,
Right.
I think there's some. HTML froze. HTML it's hard to build a really good application. It's easier now, but it just in pure HTML. So I think that just you almost had to go to something more like React, and then React for whatever reason was just the standard that everyone picked.
Right.
So I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what your opinion is on it, though, because well, part of my problem, and this is one thing, I was just on another podcast, and the people were being pretty critical of React, And I kept telling him like, I can't really say that much about React because I just don't know it. I had
Right.
intercooler the whole time and then HTMX, and I just didn't live in that world long, like enough with enough experience to really have something intelligent to say about it, other than to say, man, that looks pretty crazy as a newbie. It's like someone who's just coming into it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, sure. I can give my 2 cents. From what I've seen, and not just, it's funny because it's not just what I saw in the moment, but it's also what I'm seeing now with the, anytime someone has a, uh, let's say a distaste for even looking at HTMX or Hyperscript right now, it kind of gives you insight into what's going on. I think what's happened, this is a motto I have on my stream. I tell everyone this, so this is not like, anything new that anybody's going to hear unless someone's actually new here. But what I think has happened is these libraries, these frameworks, particularly for the front end, we're trying to solve initially some problems that couldn't be solved. Like you're saying with HTML, there was no like good solid solution, and then they ballooned out of control. And what happened is that people were people in general. I'm not pointing at any fingers at anyone in particular, but from developers all the way up to the people making decisions at the executive level at companies, making choices like, well, this library just exists. It does a bunch of stuff for us. It abstracts away a bunch of cognitive load that you would otherwise have to have from a developer's perspective. It's documented. It has a huge community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when you look at it, all you focus on is, what am I going to get out of this library? And nobody ever asks, not ever, but rarely do people ask, what am I not going to get out of this framework? And that's what people were missing. And it became really easy for, just as an example, it became really easy for developers to say, if a project manager came up to them and said, how would you solve this technical problem? Oh, that's easy. React. Oh, that's easy. Vue. Oh, that, like, pick your library, right? Pick your abstraction. I'll just use this. And then project managers go, oh, great. And you're going to do it really fast, and it's going to have a lot of support, and other people, I mean, this sounds awesome. Why don't we do it this way? And then what happens is you're sitting around in a room full of people who are like all using React, for example, and you've gone really fast. You've shipped a lot of features, and the rubber hits the road, and you finally hit the part where React is not doing what you want it to do, and nobody knows what's going on under the hood because everyone's been trained at the abstraction level. Nobody actually understands what's going on with JavaScript under the hood, and by the time you get there, it's way too late. You're in firefighting mode. You're not in preventative mode. So the mental mindset is it leans too heavily into reaching into these things and using them as crutches, whereas I tell people on my stream, and what I try and show through what I'm actually building on my stream, putting my money where my mouth is, that you should be asking, why should I use this framework, and why can't I use anything else? Right. And that's a really hard sell. What I've noticed is I have two people I work with who are contractors when they originally joined on my team. And they looked at me really weird when I told them, like, this is how I'm doing things. I'm using HTMX, Hyperscript, Laravel, PHP. Then they're like, dude, you're crazy. It's not going to work, whatever. And I'm like, listen, shut up. I'm paying you. You're a mercenary for hire. You don't come in here and tell me, just do what, if you want to get your money, do what I tell you to do. And they obliged.
Right.
2 weeks later, working with it, they both turned around. One is a heavy front end guy. One is a heavy back end guy. And they're like, I can't see me using other frameworks in any other way unless it's a really specific use case. I can't believe how well this works. This is way better. Why didn't I know about this before? And they're not the only two people that I know. And that's usually how I find people turn around, not by talking to them about it, but by encouraging them to try it themselves, because there is a mental block that's been somehow ingrained in the technology landscape. Oh, just do this. Why not? And you almost have to kind of like lead them to the water and then hope they try it, and then they might see, That's my view on it anyways.
Yeah, no, I think that's true there, and especially you have to. I think that's one thing with HTMX is it's you can talk about ADOS and all that stuff until you're blue in the face, and for
Yeah.
some people that's good. They like the theory, but a lot of people just have to see it in practice.
Right.
And so that's just I think that's just the way it is with technology in general. So
Yeah.
the good news is it seems like we're over the hump here. So
Yeah.
people are gonna, and the thing is, you can paint yourself into a corner with HTMX too. Like if you get really wild with events and all that stuff, it's not a silver bullet. And
Right.
I've been saying this a lot lately. Like, I do want to de-escalate the conversation a little bit
Right. Right.
because HTMX is a good tool, but it's just a tool, and there isn't a silver bullet. You're gonna still have to factor your application properly. And if you get, real crazy, then, you can use HTMX in a bad way.
Right.
Just like I'm sure you can use React in a bad way. And there are going to be times when React's the right solution. So
Yep.
I think now that HTMX is sort of like gotten over the hump, hopefully I can focus less on the like trash talk and more on the like, here's the situation, and here's when it's a good idea, and here's when it's not.
Right.
So
Well, that's perfect because literally question number 2, literally, what is a solid or some solid examples that you can think of where HTMX wouldn't work well?
yeah, I mean, the ones I give in every interview, Google Maps would not work well because you have a lot of mouse events you have to respond to quickly. So
Mhm.
you can't afford to make a server round trip on those. Google Sheets, probably not good because you have a lot of weird dependencies and you don't want to refresh the whole page. You have a lot of funky state. Um, what else? Games. Um, this stuff though that's information oriented, like GitHub. People sometimes are like, "Oh, you could never do Gmail," and I'm like, "You could do an awesome Gmail with
Totally.
HTMX." It would be online only. That would be
Right.
the downside. So if you're talking about like if you need to have offline behaviors, obviously HTMX isn't a great option
Right.
until someone finally builds the web worker framework that can sync data with the back end when it goes back online. Like
Right.
once that's around, then maybe you can start talking about using HTMX for that stuff. But so I think that the closer it is to the more traditional bread and butter of the web of like forms and images and text, the better HTMX will perform.
Right. Well, that's great because that was my last top question is how would you deal with offline mode? You just answered it. So far
Yeah.
we're on the right streak here.
Okay.
Okay, so the next question then, a little bit just a little bit of a veer from HTMX.
Mhm.
During what portion of your career in general did you learn the most?
I learned the most in my first job after graduate school. So I went to undergraduate, and this is kind of funny. I dropped out of computer science in undergrad.
No way.
Yeah, I did, and I dropped out of computer science after 2 years. So I went in my high school. I was one of the smarter kids, and then I went to college, and I was not one of the smarter kids, and I wasn't used to that,
Right.
and I was pretty intimidated. My school was a just different environment than where I went to college, and so I ended up majoring in industrial engineering, but
Wow.
by the end I was programming a ton because that was my advantage over the other industrial engineering students was that I could program. And I graduated, I think, in '99. And at that point, it was like there was no industrial engineering jobs. Everyone wanted computer programmers. And so I just naturally became a computer programmer.
Right.
Um, did that for a couple of years and then went back to graduate school, got a master's in computer science because I always felt like I kind of had failed in undergrad. And I got a job right out of my master's program. And on that job, I met a guy who had learned recursive descent parsing. I had always wanted, I was really interested in programming languages, like my master's was in programming languages.
Yeah.
I just got very lucky and worked with a guy who knew how recursive descent worked. And this was back before there was the Crafting Interpreters book by, who's that? Neusum, I forget, but Crafting Interpreters, which is a great book and shows you how to do recursive descent. The universities didn't and don't, unless you come to MSU and you take my compilers class, teach recursive descent, and it was just like was totally mind blowing to me. Way better, like 6 months at that company were way better than my graduate school at Stanford, as far as like learning how to actually build a real programming language. And that was definitely where I learned the most, was at that first company. Um, there was another time, sort of like when I was building intercooler and really getting into the Rails community, that I learned a lot as well. But it was less. It just wasn't as dramatic. I feel like it was more learning about Rails than learning about sort of conceptual ideas.
Right. Okay. Okay. So if, um, from my experience too, it sounds like there's a similarity there where when you're exposed to something, you're a bit more bare metal with the company or the product that you're working with. And you actually get to be more hands-on, have more ownership. You're not really like a number or a cog in the machine, another body to punch out code. You tend to learn a lot more and also care a lot more about what you learn. Makes more of an impact. Would you generally agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. That's one thing that's really tough, I think, in computer as a computer programmer. Like one thing I've noticed in my career is there's been sort of like long periods where I feel like I haven't done much or
Right.
haven't made much progress. And then there are these, and they're very random. Like something just comes up, and suddenly you're like, oh, and you just make a huge amount of headway on something.
Right.
And I've had many times in my life when it seemed like, oh man, my career is, I don't want to say over, but like, okay, I'm just going to do this or that.
Right.
And then, something comes up. And I think that's, computer science has that weird, computer programming, whatever you want to call this,
Hmm.
has that weird sort of, like mathematics, there are these aha moments where you kind of have to grind along at a certain level for a while. And then suddenly you make this big jump and, you understand something a lot better.
Right.
I think that can be frustrating about a computer science career, but that's just, it's one thing I tell my students is if I could give my younger self advice, it would be don't give up. You're smart enough. If you made it this far, if you're in college as a computer programmer and you made it past like the first couple of years, you're smart enough to be in the industry. And even if you didn't make the first couple, like I didn't, I
Right.
teach the class that actually knocked me out of computer science now at MSU.
Yeah.
The same
Okay.
class that I was like, nope, I'm out,
Yeah. Yeah.
is one of the classes I teach. So,
That must be like kind of
um,
a weird, good and weird thing that you're into now. Like it must feel strange a little bit.
it is funny. I,
Yeah.
I I think things are very funny.
Uh,
That's what I try and have that perspective. Like
yeah.
this is funny.
Yeah. Life tends to do that to you. Um. So if since you're teaching, I'm curious. What are some of the you don't have to expound on it too much if you don't want to. But what are some of the like more important things that you like talking about in your class that you like teaching your students?
Well, I'm a big fan of recursive descent, in my compilers class, and that what I love about recursive descent is it shows the recursive nature of grammars in a way that, if you use a parser generator, you just don't see it.
Right.
It's not as obvious. I try to focus. I try and teach my students how to use a debugger, because I think a debugger. One of the things that makes you a good computer programmer is being able to emulate the computer,
Right.
right? You have to be able to look at the code and like evaluate the code effectively in your own head to be a good programmer.
Right.
And building up that mental model of how a computer works, is really, really important. And I think for a lot of people, a visual debugger where they can see the stack and they can see the variables and step through a loop and so forth, it really opens up their brain to this is how the computer is working.
Right.
And so that's a big focus of me in my classes, is just making sure the students learn how to pick up the debugger, and use it effectively. Um, what else do I try to talk? I do, I grug brain, like try and keep
Right.
complexity down. Don't try not to be attracted to, fancy problems. Try not to be intimidated by people that, it's okay to say, I don't understand this.
Right.
It's dicey when you're young, when you're a younger developer, that it can hurt your career to say, this is too complicated for me. I
Yeah.
had that experience when I was younger. Cause I remember very vividly a senior developer looking at me. I was on I was like one of the younger people on a platform team. So, we were the hot shots in the company, and the senior guy just looked at me and was like, your problem is that you give up too easy. You give up on these problems too easy.
Right.
And I was, and that was where I was trying to say, like, hey, this just seems too crazy. Can we do something simpler? So it is, and, it probably hurt my career at that company.
Right.
But I do think, that ability, especially when you're a senior developer, to kind of say, look, let's, is there a simpler way to do this? Can be really valuable.
Right.
So I try and stress that, but be realistic too. I tell my students, I try and shoot straight with them about what the industry's like. So,
Right. Well, those are good answers, because the inverse question would have been, what do you, when you are interacting with your students, what do you think is missing the most as they come in? And really, it's the inverse of what you're teaching, right? You're filling in the gaps where you see that it's missing, right? So, it's a good
yeah.
answer. Yeah.
I think it's knowing those tools, having a sense of what's, how to write code,
Yeah.
what good code kind of looks like. Although what I think is good code and what most people think is good code may be different. Like, I'm very comfortable with long functions, for example. It depends on the context, but like, I don't mind a 300 line function if there's 300 lines worth of stuff to do, and if pulling the stuff out doesn't add any value.
Right.
I'd rather go into a file where there's one big function and then like 10 small functions and understand this is what this file is doing, than go into a file and there's like 110 line functions that all look identical. They're all like, one for loop and one if statement.
Yeah.
So, other people might disagree with that, but that's definitely my opinion.
Mhm.
I think, boy, if I could give my students one thing when they got to my classes, it would be a GitHub account and basic knowledge of how Git and GitHub work,
Right.
because I have to teach them that. And that's, it takes time and it's confusing. I don't like Git's not a very user friendly program, particularly if you're just a person who's like on a Windows machine and you're not,
Right.
like Macs are expensive for college students and Linux machines are kind of nerdy. And so a lot of
Right.
people are on Windows, and it's not a great story on Windows.
Yeah. No, yeah. I can attest to that. Okay. So the next question that I have is here it is. What is something we're not talking about in tech, but we should be?
Oh boy, I knew this question was coming and I didn't think about it. You're gonna have to give me a second
No
here.
problem. No problem. Take your time.
What are we not talking about in tech? What are we not talking about in tech? Hypermedia. No, that's boring. Um, one thing that might get interesting again is DSLs, domain specific languages,
Mm-hmm.
because there was this flurry of excitement around DSLs like around 2000, and between 2000 and 2010 there was sort of this flurry of excitement around languages. And I feel like we've sort of gone more towards there was this big drive towards this monoculture of JavaScript. Like you could see it. I mean, I hate to say it, but you could see the glee in the eyes of the JavaScript people that were like, everyone is going to be writing JavaScript everywhere in 5 years. Like 3 years ago, I think that was the thinking, and you could see the triumphalism in a lot of people's faces. And I think we've probably rounded the corner on that, to where like, okay, there's Go's going to be around, OCaml's going to, like, all these languages are going to be around. Like, let's use the PHP is going to be around forever. So like we've accepted a multi-language future, but maybe this idea of DSLs could come back, because it's not hard to create a programming language. And there are times when creating a programming language is actually like a really useful thing. Leaving aside you've got it like type systems and
Right.
tooling and all that stuff, which there's a much higher bar now for that. But with with the way the language servers now work, and you can use the parser for the language in the language server, it really cuts down a lot on the junk that needs to happen in order to have a good experience with a custom programming language. So I wonder if that maybe is something that will not necessarily make a comeback, but not be quite as crazy as it sounds right now.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of in line with what you are promoting with HTMX, where you have like the locality of behavior. It's under the same principle where like your language is kind of like based around the locality of what it's trying to solve in some sense, right? And so that principle
Yeah,
undertone kind of exists there. And I could see, I think you might have a point here where we look at HTMX and we go, oh wow, like yeah, duh, we've had this all along. And you know, it's like that chart you see, it's like you know, HTML is fine, and then everyone must use React, and then HTML is fine again. And maybe the same thing
right,
happens at a language level, just like at a one
right.
level higher, you know?
Yeah, there were a lot of tools like HyperCard and even Visual Basic 6. Like they produced these files, and VB wasn't very good at it, but
Mm,
and HyperCard was a little opaque as well. But it seems like the higher level programming, like computers are really fast. Look at Hyperscript.
right,
Hyperscript is an interpreter written in JavaScript, which is an interpreted language.
right.
Like that's insane performance wise, but it works pretty well. And so I feel like there might be an opportunity to get kind of like higher level with this stuff, and like you're saying, sort of embed just higher level stuff like small talk, right? Small talk used to be like this too. You had an environment, and you kind of froze it and ship that. There are some really interesting ideas in the past. This is one thing I'd encourage all the listeners or watchers to do, is like do some research on like cool old stuff, like Firth, or Forth I should say.
Right.
Firth is my class version of it. There's and small talk and like all these random like Lisp, all this stuff. There's a lot of interesting ideas, and we have very fast computers now. And if you don't do like all the crazy stuff that like a lot of these JavaScript frameworks do, you can actually get away with like some pretty surprisingly sophisticated stuff and not a lot of code. So,
Yeah.
so I don't know. That's kind of rambly, but that's where I went with it.
No, that's great. That's great. Okay, so I'm mindful of the time. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I thought what I would do
Sure.
now is I take a chance to kind of like explain to you how I'm using HTMX and Hyperscript and why it's been
Sure.
so helpful to me, just to kind of like uh, I don't know, help any viewers to kind of see what, you know, that I'm not just interviewing someone and then I'm walking away. I'm actually putting this in action, and to help you to kind of get a sense of how it's being used in the real world. So I can't really dox the company or anything. I have to be a little bit vague, but suffice it to
Sure.
say, the product is worth at least several million right now in terms of like revenue and whatnot. It's not small, and the team size, however, is small. So what happened is I walked in, and it's Laravel PHP. And so what Laravel PHP does, the way I use it now, we have the benefit of being able to fragment portions of my page, my entire page. So anytime HTMX or Hyperscript makes a backend call, I can literally tell Laravel only return certain fragments, which makes it nice and easy to do the swapping. But at the time, that wasn't the case.
Right.
There was a front
Okay.
end team um, uh, of an undeterminate size, and they started off using Livewire, which comes with Laravel, and then they
Yeah.
moved to Vue. I joined in at the
Hmm.
Livewire stage, and then I was asked about my opinion on Vue, and I kind of went pushed back against it, and I was reading up and learning and practicing like HTMX and Hyperscript, and I wanted to lean in that direction. But the front end team
Sure.
kind of like pushed me just a little bit, like in a good way, not too much. And I kind of caved. Okay, like I'm also a little bit new here, and they really know Vue. And so for my sake, it'd be
Right.
nice to just kind of like offload that responsibility and deal with some other stuff that
Hmm.
needed to be dealt with because the team was small. So about a
Can I
year,
interrupt you really
yeah,
quickly?
go for it.
I'm curious why the move from Livewire to Vue. Why did that happen? Well, because I've heard good things about Livewire.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Okay.
Seriously, I don't know
Okay.
the I don't know the mental thinking that went into it. Like I don't know the reasons exactly. Um,
Mm,
uh, I didn't honestly. We were so much under pressure. It's like a startup worth lots of money, and there's lots of
mm,
pressure, and the team is small, and I am in charge of the team, and I
mm.
can't think of everything and ask all the questions. So to some
Sure.
degree, I take some responsibility that I caved there. But there,
Right.
there was also external pressure to kind of do it anyways, because like I said, the moment you say, why don't we use HTMX Hyperscript and do it this way, the old fashioned way, everybody goes, what the heck are you talking about? Are you insane? Right? So
Sure.
a year and a half approximately ish goes by, and we've built a bunch of pages in Vue. The front end UI is not complete. And there are still pages that we started with a year and a half before that are not complete and full of bugs a year and a half later. And I had gotten to the point by then where I had done a bunch of my own projects to the point where basically the company just trusted me to do whatever I wanted to do. Basically, if I made
Okay.
a decision, it was just go. So I finally had enough because the UI cycle was just way too long, and I said I needed to listen to my gut more at the beginning. So I spent 2 weeks and I redid the entire website, front end, HTMX Hyperscript
Hmm.
by myself. It was a long 2 weeks, but I did it.
Yeah, I bet.
Suffice it to say, the Vue team's not there right now. There.
Okay.
And ever since then, I spent 3 or 4 months by myself, and then I hired two contractors, the contractors I spoke of before, who also gave me that look. And ever since then, we've been approximately 2 weeks ahead every sprint, on every sprint.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
the main reason behind that was the question of why are we using Vue? Not that Vue is bad, you shouldn't use Vue. It's why are we using it? And when you look at the things you get out of it and the things you don't get out of it, given the context of what you're building, HTMX and Hyperscript felt like a better match. And then I went out and I took it upon myself to prove that fact, because then if I failed, it's all on me. Nobody else got hurt, everything can keep moving forward. And then I failed whatever, I spent 2 weeks and failed on a project, right? But that's what drove me to use it. And man, ever since then it's been, I mean, I can definitely say it's improved my own like mental health with work because I can deal with things a bit better, but it's also improved the
Sure.
developer experience for myself and the contractors, who are now employees, by the way, because they like working there so much now. So I just wanted to
Nice.
give you that insight because it helps you kind of like understand how it's actually being used in the real world, and
Right.
the viewers, a story about what's happened to me, and hopefully it helps them as well. So,
Do
yeah.
you feel like the UI took any major step back as far as what you could do with it?
Not only could I match every single feature we had in the Vue system, but I also added features that were on the wish list for that 1.5 years. Here's the most complicated thing I did. You were talking about Excel spreadsheets, right? We have a table.
Mm,
It's an administrative table and it's full of users. And
mhm.
you have to take a bunch of actions on each row and on each cell of each row. And here's just an example of something that's actually quite complicated. You need to associate one user with every other possible user given a specific context. So you're going to have a
Mm,
drop down next to the individual user, and then you're going to have a mini drop down, but it's going to have a filter search bar. Then you're going to have
yep.
check marks beside each one, and you're going to have pagination. It's
Yeah.
basically a mini table. I mean, you're talking about
Yeah.
like almost Excel level, almost. That's
Yeah.
hard.
Right.
But then I thought about that,
Yeah.
and all I did was I created a separate backend page just for that drop down.
Yep.
And then I just wrapped some
Sure.
CSS around it, call some HTMX to do a swap, and you could,
Yeah.
in theory,
Yep.
even just go right to that page and use that drop down as a full on page, right? And
Right.
once I started readjusting my mindset to what if this was the traditional way where you're filling out a form,
Mhm.
your URL state is managing it, you're going through it step by step. and each thing is its own page, then HTMX bridges the gap the rest of the way, because now you're just saying, give me this page as a fragment, and then apply some CSS to make it interactive, and maybe a little bit of Hyperscript sprinkled here and there. And man, we have like a really complicated, admin table system that way, right? So we're kicking butt with the features. We haven't lost a thing.
Okay. Yeah, I've never done that, and that's there's that React to HTMX that Contexte, the French company, did that really showed good results and finally gave me something I could hang my hat on. But as I said earlier, like I just never got into the React world and the Vue world and all the rest of it, and so it's always been kind of more speculative on my part. So I'm glad to hear it's worked out really well. I've seen a couple of comments online where people say, "Oh, I tried HTMX and then it got ugly, and so I yanked it out and went with Vue or something like that." And I'd love if anyone is listening who has had that experience, I would love to get an essay up on HTMX about it, and it just be brutally honest. Like, here's why it didn't work. And if there's stuff that, maybe I can look at it and say like, well, you could have done this or that. But I don't want people using HTMX if it's not going to be a good experience for them. There's no money in HTMX. It's a BSD library at the end of the day. And so, it's just more people I have to, handle tickets from.
Right.
So I do, I do want to be honest, but at the same time, it's obviously extremely edifying to hear that it worked out really well for you. So that's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I thank you, because to be quite honest, I've done a little bit of React work, and I've done work with Angular in various versions that have given me nightmares and have breaking changes between versions. For example, that have destroyed websites that I've worked on, destroyed all the hard work, not just of the developers like myself, but also of the company, the people who put time and money into it, only to be broken by a framework that they sunk, they put an anchor on it, and then it just, went away basically, or heavily changed. And I kind of, I feel akin to what you feel, which is there's a certain level of, it's almost like a Stockholm syndrome of sorts, where people are like, they love their captive right now. When I see things like React server components, where it's like, oh yeah, now we're going to bring the front end JavaScript into the back end, and you can make DB calls in your React component, and then you can ship it back. And I'm like, my initial gut reaction is like, really? Is this what we're resorting to? Do we actually need this? And I feel like, weird and strange. And to have someone like you come and say, hey, wait, there's a little bit of sanity, and then I get to use it in my job and kick butt with it. Like, I appreciate that. So thank you for opening that door.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's been great. Like, it's surprising to me. I didn't expect this. I figured, 2 years ago, I figured the React train was just going to go on forever, and I would become less and less relevant over time. So it's been very surprising to me. There are cycles in technology. That's one thing I think, like, one thing that I since I had that early experience with XJS, and I also saw some of the like Java server faces technologies that I've seen this, like trying to manage state on the server and then replicate it to the client before, and it just got really complicated. And one thing I've really come to appreciate about the web is this stateless the state is on the server, and if you just make that simplification, yes, there's a price to pay for it, but that price is often worth paying for the simplicity that comes along with that model. So, all I can say is, like, I'm really glad. I'm really glad I happen to be in the right place to catch the wave of discontent with this.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, this is great. Okay, so again, just being mindful of time. I know you're generous with your time, and you said you're pretty chill and laid back, but just in case, you have some, and I know you're in the middle of a storm, who knows what's going to happen, right? So,
hopefully you guys can't hear the wind. It's like howling outside right now.
I personally can't hear it at all. I don't know about chat, but
can the chat hear the wind in the background? It was like 60-mile-an-hour gusts. It was pretty intense.
Yeah. So I think maybe if you're open to it, maybe we can let the chat fire off some questions. And if you catch a question you want to answer, just go for it, and I'll keep an eye on chat too, and we'll just coordinate, and you just, answer whatever you like. So chat, take it away.
Yeah, why don't no? I'll let you. Why don't you pick the ones out
Okay,
that you
you got
like
it.
and
I'll
feed
pick
them
them.
to me? I like that. Just so there's one person in control.
Sure, you got it. No problem. Okay. If anybody has questions, I am watching right now. Um, Also going to go back and see if anybody asked
Mm.
questions previously. Um,
I
some
saw someone asked about if you thought the Vue team, given your 2 week rewrite, if they could have gone back and started over, if they might have had a shot at doing a better job too.
I would put almost all my money ever that they wouldn't. I'm
Yeah,
pretty confident with that, and it's
sure.
because you're fitting it to me. What it looked like was somebody literally fitting a square peg into a round hole. It was not the right fit,
Yeah.
and I don't think there's any way you could have cut it, to make it better. And I see that as it wasn't the first time that I had seen that. That's happened with React applications, and that's happened with Angular applications, and another one I can't remember, Backbone, I think, where
Okay.
um, it's like the sunk cost fallacy to some degree, and to another degree, it's just, oh, this is just life. We're here now. We're just going to deal with it. It's not the first time, right? So I knew I should have seen the red flag much earlier. But
Okay.
okay, so here's a question: do you see HTMX getting folded into W3C specs, HTML specs at all?
The concepts might. I doubt the syntax would, and I
Hmm.
don't think the syntax is a good choice. I think if you would want to stay closer to the existing, uh, like attributes that are around. But my hope is that the concepts do at some point. I think I've got some contacts with the Chrome engineers, and a couple of people at Microsoft on the Edge team, and they definitely know about HTMX now. It'd be cool. I think it's the right thing.
Right.
It's the right idea. Like maybe, the implementation maybe isn't the best in some ways, but the concepts are pretty solid as far as generalizing hypermedia controls, like make anchors and forms just more general.
Right. Okay. Yeah. There's one I see right now. Is there something in HTMX that you would like to add that perhaps you may have skipped?
No, HTMX, if anything, I'd like to take stuff out of it.
Haha, good answer.
At this point, I think we're about feature full. HTMX2 is going to be 99.9% compatible with HTMX1.
Right.
We're going to pull out some deprecated features and change some defaults, add one or two major features. But I think, I really want, after HTMX2 ships, I want to do a video and just walk people through the code and be
Yeah.
like, look, you could write this code. This is not, there's nothing special about this. And I think there's an opportunity for HTMX developers to understand HTMX in a way that React developers can't. Like HTMX doesn't have to be a black box. You should be able to set a breakpoint in HTMX and step through it and see why it's doing the thing that it's doing and be able to make sense of it as a
Right.
reasonable engineer. So that's a goal of mine this year, is to really open that up to people.
Right. That leads that's a good point you bring out, because it reminds me of something. The very first time I went onto the HTMX website and I tried some of the examples you have there, it blew
Mm-hmm.
my mind. You have some examples where if you don't know what you're looking for, you're going to miss it. And I'm saying that as a constructive criticism, because I think it's a powerful
Mm-hmm.
feature you could highlight more. The ability to execute an operation on, say, a form or an element, and you literally have the request. You can open up and expand and see what's coming in and out in real time,
Mm-hmm.
even though a lot of it is like faked out. I think maybe in entirety it's faked out. But that, to
Yeah.
me, the ability to see all of that and literally like watch, even with fake data, and see it interact on screen was a powerful motivator
Mm-hmm.
for me to look at it more. And I think maybe you might be
Yeah.
underutilizing that a bit. That might be a good teaching mechanism.
Yeah, one thing we've talked about doing is building like a debugger tool, like a plugin for browsers that you
Right.
can load up, and it'll sort of sit and show you all the elements that are HTMX powered, and then do something similar where it shows you exactly like here's the stuff we're going to swap in, and here's what got selected out of it, and
Right.
do some neat visual work. That would be really cool.
Yeah.
I don't have enough time for it this year though.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, teaching materials are you know, it's hard to come by good ones. And I
Yeah.
think, if it comes from you and you're already a teacher, if you have the time to spend on it, it would probably go a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's someone provoking me in the chat. Can I answer his question?
Absolutely,
It's
go for
almost
it.
certainly a he. So clearly you hate JavaScript, but now you're established in the ecosystem. What are your thoughts on HTMX's future, given concerns with code at the edge? The popular knowledge is that this is mostly JS shipped to edge servers. I do not hate JavaScript. I don't love JavaScript. I JavaScript is not a great general purpose language, but it's an okay scripting language. Um, I do not think edge computing is that big of a deal because, for a lot of apps, anyways, is going to be particularly useful because the data is still going to have to live in a centralized server somewhere. Like you still are going to have a database, and so if you have an edge server that can respond really quickly, but still has to synchronize data to some central server, like you have two options. You can either say, "Yep, I accept that request,"
Right.
and then sort of do optimistic, sort of an optimistic response,
Hmm.
or you have to wait until you talk to the backend store anyways and get confirmation that the thing is actually committed. And so I think for most applications, edge computing is not probably going to be significant technology as far as making things better for end users.
Right.
I think you can do that same thing, that optimistic update. You can do that at the client. You don't have to do it at the edge. I think I'm gonna be a little bit spicy here and say I think a lot of edge computing is VCs trying to sell servers at marked up costs to developers.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Um, there's a nice comment from Papa Owl, which is right down from where you read. Not a question, but a fun fact that I would love to share with Carson because I know he will appreciate it. I sold HTMX on my current project
Ah.
because it has IE support. I work for a fintech that has old banking societies that have ancient computers. HTMX saved my life.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
that's awesome. That is really cool.
I like
And
that.
we're going to continue to support HTMX1 forever. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so you'll always have HTMX, and it won't be that different than HTMX2.
Yeah. I mean, I'm excited for HTMX too. Um, the there's two other questions that I thought I would bring up, or maybe, yeah, no, two other questions. What do you like using as a backend for HTMX?
Boy, I haven't I haven't done a bunch of HTMX work. I like it's a little sad, but I actually like Java.
Oh wow.
But Java has just absolutely terrible web frameworks.
Yeah.
There's a couple of decent ones. There's one called Javelin, I think, that's pretty good. Um, Most of the interesting stuff on the JVM is in Kotlin now,
Right.
or
Yeah.
a little bit in Scala. So,
Yeah.
boy, I really like the idea of Go, but Go has this one killer problem with it for the type of work I like to do, which is you can't dynamically load modules. They have a plugin framework, but it doesn't work very well. So you can't dynamically load like a dependency in Go, and just
Oh,
because of the sort of infrastructure code that I write, I really want that ability. So I don't know. This is like I don't know what I would pick today. PHP seems interesting,
I
you
mean,
know, um, close
it's,
to the metal, right?
yeah.
Close to the web metal.
Yeah. I have a few people that come in and they have bad experiences historically with PHP, and believe me, so have I. I don't blame them one single bit. And then I encourage them to go back and try PHP 8.1 or higher. And I actually made a bet with one of the people in my chat. I said, I bet you that if you try PHP 8.1, especially with Laravel, you will at least walk away feeling better about PHP than when you went coming in. And if you don't,
Right.
I will gift you 12-month sub to any Twitch channel of your choice. And the streamer went and tried it, and sure enough, they came back and they said, "Yeah, it is better. It's not like perfect, but it's better." And then they chose NeoVim for me to contribute, and I gave them the contribution in equivalence, anyways, just for them even at trying
Sure.
it, right? So I think PHP
Yeah.
has come a long way. It's still not perfect, but
Yeah.
I know I'm using it quite well, and it works really, really well. So it might be worth a shot for you to look into. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it just depends a lot on the project. I like different languages too. I'm
Yeah.
happy to pick up a language for a project. So,
Yeah. I do have one final question that I think is a reasonable one to ask you, because I've seen you say this before, and I would be curious as well. You talk about in the future HTMX devs that are good at SQL will be
mhm.
basically like better front end devs, something along those lines. Can you kind of expand on
Yeah.
what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think front end is really hard. Like, I know it's kind of people bash on front end web developers, maybe not front end in
Right.
particular, but web development. Like, oh, these guys they're idiots, and there is a low barrier to entry.
Yeah.
But there's a huge amount of stuff you have to know, like to know CSS really well, and to know JavaScript and HTML, and then maybe back. Like, there's a lot there, and there are people that know HTML, JavaScript, and CSS really well today. A
Yeah.
lot of those people are working in React, and they're starting to do, and then maybe they use some Node on the back end, or maybe not. Um, but if those people who are really solid, have really good solid web fundamentals, are able to learn SQL or a good OR tool and some domain logic, like even if they're not necessarily writing the domain logic, if they can just figure out how to work with a model
Right.
properly, they're going to be in a position to really rip with HTMX, because they can do that full stack development. It's, a back end developer right now. The meme is that HTMX is for back end developers.
Yeah.
And that's true to, there's probably some truth to that as it stands right now. But the people who are really in a position to fly with this are people who understand that front end part and can really complete the feature in a way that like they can impose their vision on it.
Right.
And that's something that, a back end person can get so far, but they're eventually going to run into CSS issues or something that needs to be scripted. And they're going to be like, I don't know JavaScript, so
Yeah.
I'm checking out here. Whereas someone who really has a good handle on the web platform, how events work, how to sprinkle a little bit of JavaScript or maybe Hyperscript if they're crazy into a UI without overdoing it. That sense of like, okay, like the right balance of those things. A person like that could really do some, I think, make a tremendous amount of progress with an HTMX based application.
Right. Yeah, that does make sense, because I do find that using it on the project I'm working on, I find that I can better map on what's happening with the front end to what's available to happen in the back end, if that kind of makes sense. The understanding of like how the back end is structured and what it's capable of doing, somehow the HTMX allows me to like better simulate that mapping of like, here's the kind of data I need to be shipping, where it should be coming from, what portions I can ignore or not ignore, what the business logic. It feels a little bit closer together, even though in reality, like they're actually a bit farther apart. You're kind of separating them a bit more in some sense, right? So
Sure.
it's kind of nice to be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think, like, and you look at how GraphQL has sort of like, if you can do GraphQL, you can do SQL,
Right.
and
Yeah.
so just learn SQL
Yeah.
and then you'll be good.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So maybe there's one more question in the chat. Let's just make sure we
yeah.
get it. So, do you feel a lot of pressure with building HTMX, and do you ever feel like you need more time before it goes mainstream?
No, HTMX is pretty baked. There's some ugly stuff in it. Like, I was grimacing at some logic in the code base that has to be there now because we exposed a method to the public API that I
Mm,
don't want to break.
yeah.
Um, but I got kind of lucky in that intercooler sort of died.
Right.
It's weird. It didn't feel like it at the time, But intercooler died, and so this is really like a second chance. And so
Yeah.
to me, this is all house money. Like,
Right. Yeah.
what are you gonna do? Like, not use HTMX? Oh no,
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so I think the ideas are pretty solid.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a perfect implementation by any means, but
Mm-hmm.
it's probably good enough for most people. And so I don't feel a ton of pressure as far as like, getting that out. It's not super complicated. The test suite's pretty good.
Yeah.
So I don't feel a ton of pressure there. And I think it probably got big at a pretty good point. It's pretty mature 1.0 product. And 2.0 let us clean some stuff up, but it
Yeah.
won't be too bad. Hyperscript, is kind of a fun project of mine anyways, and that's how I treat it.
Yeah.
So I just say, I think I really benefited from having intercooler fail like to an extent, just like not go anywhere and sort of die. In that it gave me this perspective of like, okay, intercooler died, but I didn't.
Right.
Like I kept programming. And this is really neat. This is fun. I love that people actually listen to what I'm saying now.
Yeah.
I guess, like it'll probably end in tears at some point here, but it's all good. I don't know.
Nothing lasts forever, one way or the other, I suppose. So, yeah.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Then that's the thing is like, and I think that the ideas of HTMX are more important than the
Yes.
implementation. The implementation is good. I don't want to, say like go look for something else necessarily, but you could do a clean room. If someone really wanted to do an 80/20 version of HTMX, especially if they drop like history support and a
Right.
few of the other things, like you could do a much tighter and more modern version of HTMX. There's people that are doing that. And I'm sure it's just too easy an idea. So there's going to be a bunch of different things that come along. The big idea is hypermedia
Yeah.
and generalizing hypermedia controls. And so,
Yeah.
if I can contribute that, then that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, you've been awesome, which I fully expected.
Thank you. I
No
appreciate
surprise
that.
there. You've been great. And chat has been really really good. They seem happy with everything we've talked about. And I appreciate you being here and giving up some of your time because I know you have a lot going on. And I personally am grateful that I get to kind of give you like a low key thanks for bringing some sanity
Yeah.
back and making me not feel alone and several others. Um, and usually people end the an interview and then it's just kind of like over and then we say bye and whatever. But I just
Yeah.
thought no pressure. It's okay if you don't have any questions. But I thought I'd give you an opportunity maybe to ask some questions back. I know you already asked like, does anybody have any particular use case where it really failed them? Can you please let me know? But if you have anything else that you want to ask, I think you should have an opportunity to ask us or me, whatever you like. But it's totally okay if you don't have anything.
Yeah. You know what? I've been on a little bit of a kick lately. Like I had a lot of really good stuff happen to me over the Christmas break.
Yeah.
Like not like I got cool presents, but just like, my book is selling really well,
Yeah.
and like I had a lot of really good interactions with people,
Yeah.
and I think there's a lot of negative energy in the world. And so one thing I'd ask, people, this is more of an ask than like a question, is
Right.
like, HTMX is getting popular, and it does have a reputation as a anti-JavaScript or at least an anti-React framework, and it is to an extent.
Yeah.
But I do think like trying to stay positive and present it as here's another tool, like here's another idea, and it's a good idea. And yeah, we're gonna get those people that are like, this is dumb, you could never build anything real
Yeah.
with it. And in the meantime, just go out and build something real with it and
Yeah.
show, those people will come around.
Yeah.
But try and be, just try and be nice to people who aren't necessarily. HTMX is big enough now that we're starting to get sort of a group mentality, and if we can be nice, I think
Right.
that'd be good. A lot of groups aren't very nice, and so let's try and be a nice group.
Right. Oh, I mean, I think that's just generally good advice ultimately.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's especially good advice when you're coming out of like, you're the black sheep for this, right? In the entire ecosystem. It probably doesn't benefit you. It doesn't bring you into the fold, so to speak, if you come out fighting all the time, right? So it's a good way
Yeah.
to ingratiate people and let them see that like, there might be something more to this than just the fighting or the arguing or the difference of opinion, perhaps, right? I think that's good
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah. And I went through that. Like, again, this is a gift that was given to me, like
Yeah.
intercooler failing and me being embittered. And you can go back and find Reddit threads with me just like, being really mean to people
Yeah.
and them being really mean to me. And it just, I don't know. I think if we can stay positive, like generalized hypermedia controls are a cool idea. You can do some cool stuff with them.
Yeah.
And here's when they're a good idea. I'd really love to see that. So
Yeah.
if I could, just recommend that to people.
Okay. That's great. Okay, so here's what I'll do. I'm gonna let the chat go, and Carson, if you could just stay for 1 minute, and I'll make sure that
Yeah.
we properly sign you off. I just want to ask you one last question before you go, just behind the scenes, make
Yeah.
sure everything's okay. But guys,
I'm gonna hang out in the chat too.
sure,
I'll hang
yeah,
out in the chat.
absolutely. So thank you everyone in chat for participating. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was educational. I hope we got a few laughs. I tried to make sure everybody was semi-entertained and semi-educated. I hope I did a reasonable job. Feel free to just trash talk me because you're going to do that anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And mods, you know what to do when the trash talk starts, okay? Timeouts for everyone except for if you see the HTMX guy, don't time him out. He gets to say whatever he wants. He's carte blanche.
I couldn't talk on. They wouldn't let me chat on the Primogens
What?
thing the other day. I think it was. I'm sure it was a boomer moment. But
Maybe, yeah. I mean, Primogen, he's getting up there in age. He's his prime.
get push, get paid says he's the HTMX guy. I don't know.
No, yeah, okay, sure.
I need to look. I need to look into that.
Yeah, we're gonna have to investigate that. Yeah. Okay, so chat, I'm gonna put you on hold for a little bit. Mods, you're in charge. Carson will stay on chat, and then I'll be back in just a few minutes. But again, Carson, can't say enough thank yous. Thank you so much. This was a blast.
Hey, I really appreciate it, and thank you. This
Yeah,
is awesome.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. What are you talking about? I appreciate it. What are you the way you're providing sanity for my job? Like you're literally saving people's jobs. Like, come on, man. Anytime
we're gonna have a Canadian standoff here.
You know what it'll be, right? We'll just be sitting around in a room apologizing to each other. That's all. Trying to buy each other Tim Hortons.
Warren's here, so
yeah,
I think I saw Warren.
I mean, Warren admitted he was Canadian today. We got it clipped. He did try to he did try to defend it after, but the mods quickly got after that. There's no record of any messages except for I am Canadian. So Warren, I'm sorry. Okay, you came to the wrong place to do that. Okay.
Yeah, he's from Dakota, which I think is different, but
I'm
still looking into this.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's leave it at that. Oh, Warren called out. Okay, thanks, chat. I'll be back, and thank you, Carson. Okay, let me just
see you guys. I'll be in the chat.
Cool.